So, folks, we're going to school. We're on the Rock Newman Show 2.0. Look, call your friends, call your family, call your mama, call your daddy, call your children. You need to see this. You need to see this because we're going to school, and it's very, very important for who you are and who you can become. Take a look. And Browder, help yourself. Take your time.
Well, here's the timeline, and this was a product that a colleague of mine in the UK by the name of Paul Abina developed. He was a high school teacher, and he found that his students, like most high school students, weren't interested in history. So over a period of several years, I worked with him in developing this timeline, which shows you the correct chronology of human history. And this is a short version of the timeline that begins at 5000 BC. And we have documented here things that were developed in Africa by African people before there was history and culture anywhere else in the world. We make reference to Nabta Playa, which was built down near the border of Egypt and Kush. It is the oldest astroarchaeological calendar in existence. It was constructed about 7000 BC, 3500 years before Stonehenge. And accurate physical evidence which demonstrates that our people in Africa had knowledge of the stars and identified specific stars that would be important to the history and development of Kemet and Kush. As we move down the timeline, we see other developments of African history and culture, and then we begin to first focus our attention on dynastic Kemet. Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks later renamed Egypt. Kemet means the nation, the land of the black people, and not the black land or the black soil, as some people would want to tell you. So these people were clear about who they were. We have images of the personalities associated with the founding of dynastic Kemet, the first documented government in the history of mankind. And as we move down the timeline, we see images of kings, royal personalities who lived, who ruled, and the accomplishments associated with them. The first significant structure here is the step pyramid of Saqqara, designed by Imhotep, the African, the world's first multi-genius. He constructed a 19-story skyscraper around 2600 BC, a building that is still standing today. That represents African architecture, engineering, astronomical development is all incorporated in this structure. And then,
Tony, before you go, I just want to reinforce something. If you don't know about Imhotep, Google it, do whatever is necessary for you and yours, those that you love, to become familiar with Imhotep. I'll give you one small example. The Hippocratic Oath is what medicine throughout the world goes by, what people take to. That's supposed to be the standard. It was by Hippocrates. Hippocrates wrote that he got it from Imhotep. He called Imhotep, what did he call him?
Asclepius, the god of medicine.
Yeah, that's right. He called Imhotep. He said he didn't deserve, it was Imhotep who taught him. He sat at the foot of Imhotep's knowledge.
Right, absolutely. And so in that context, Rock, the Greeks came into Kemet, renamed it Egypt, studied 4,000 years of African excellence, and then attempted to replicate it the best they could. And so the Greeks then went on to become the fathers of medicine, the fathers of philosophy. But they acknowledged, the Greeks acknowledged, that we got all of this from the Africans in Kemet. So those are memories that have to be restored as well. So Imhotep, and as a matter of fact, a great book on Imhotep is called Imhotep the African, written by Robert Bauval and Thomas Brophy, Imhotep the African. So we have the Great Pyramids at Giza, which from the time of their construction, around 2500 BC until 1888, when the Washington Monument was built, this was the tallest man-made object on the planet. African excellence on display. We move down the timeline and we can see images of African rulers. Even though some of the noses may be missing, some of the lips may be missing, you can still tell you're looking at the faces of African people. As we continue down the timeline, we have examples of the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which is the oldest medical text ever recorded, which we know that it was a copy of an earlier ancient African medical text. So again, reinforcing the significance of Imhotep as the true father of medicine. And then we have other kings as we move down the timeline. We have here is the main reference that I want to make here is 832 BC. 832 BC is when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. That is the earliest example of writing in Europe, which existed thousands of years after documented examples of African writing. Every temple in Kemet had a library. Every library had thousands of books, papyrus scrolls, on knowledge associated with every aspect of the human endeavor. So the Europeans began writing at 832 BC. And then we have at 776, Romulus and Remus founded the city of Rome. So right here in this little area, we have the beginning of Greco-Roman civilization, which is where European history begins. So they began our history here, eliminating all of this, or appropriating much of this as their own creation. As we continue to move down the timeline, we also see here references of the 25th dynasty, Africans from Kush who ruled Kemet for about 100 years. And unfortunately, many Egyptologists and historians refer to the 25th dynasty as the Negro dynasty, which implies that the other dynasties or rulers in Kemet were not African. That's not true. Those are memories that need to be erased and restored with accurate memories. So it just so happens that the tombs that we are restoring were tombs that were built during the 25th dynasty, tombs associated with some of the most significant rulers in the history of the world. And the primary tomb is of a priest by the name of Karakomen, who, based on our evidence, we believe very strongly that he was likely the son of Shabaka, the third king of the 25th dynasty. As we move down the timeline, we come into a period where the Greeks began to come into Egypt to study in Egypt.
Let me slide over. See,
Okay.
you get a better shot.
We come down the timeline. We reach the period here where the Greeks began coming into Egypt or Kemet to study philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and they then return home and will later become the fathers of those things that were said to have been attributed to them. And then we have the period here, 332 is when Alexander of Macedonia conquered Kemet. And then the name Kemet was renamed to Egypt. Egypt is a word that describes the name of one temple in the lower part of the country. And that name was given to the entire country. So Egypt is a Greek word. Pyramid is a Greek word. Sphinx is a Greek word. So if we don't know the original names of African people, places, and things, we don't know jack. It's about restoring those memories. And so the Romans took over Egypt in 30 BC and ruled Egypt for approximately 300 years. So when you see people talk about the Egyptians as being white, they're really talking about Egypt under the rulership of Europeans during this time frame from 332 until about 350 AD. And then other invaders came in and ultimately took control of all the land. But the important point that I want to leave, you mentioned the Moors. So here we have images here of the Moors' invasion of Spain in 711, bringing history and culture and science and philosophy and astronomy into Europe, taking Europeans out of the caves, so to speak. They ruled from 711 to 1492 in Spain before they were driven out. And then we have the rise of various empires and kingdoms in West Africa. The important thing that I want us to focus our attention on is this little period here in blue, which is the period of the European enslavement of African people. It runs from 1444 until 1888. When people talk about Black history or Negro history, they lock us in this time frame when they enslaved our ancestors, killed tens of millions of men, women, and children in order to create the wealthiest power systems that the world has ever known, and the United States is the end product of that. So whenever we deal with our history, or they talk about black history and begin it here, they are erasing and ignoring all of this documented history, which is so vital to our development as human beings, as mothers and fathers. So this is what the process of being a memory recovery specialist entails: doing the research, documenting the stories, and then making that information available to those with the need to know, and having opportunities such as being here with you, Rock, to share this information with a larger audience so people can begin to learn what they never learned at school. And the takeaway from this interview today, this discussion today, is we should know that we can never rely on our former oppressors to educate us or our children. Look what's happening in Florida, in Virginia, in Texas, and all around the country. White folk are afraid to teach the truth about what their ancestors have done to us and done to others around the world. So it is our responsibility to do what our ancestors did hundreds of years ago, and that is to teach us what they know. So we should make our homes our first schools,
Yes.
the first libraries.
Yeah.
We should make our barbershops, our beauty shops, our Masonic lodges, our fraternities and sororities, and our churches sacred spaces where we can have these conversations with our children and the adults in the community on a regular basis. That's how we change the dynamic and the circumstances that we currently find ourselves in.
If I was the king of the